Should Bakugo have died? This question raises a very interesting point of discussion. First of all, let's analyze the entire scene of Bakugo's death. Bakugo gains extra speed thanks to the side effect of Cluster, gets back up and charges at Shigaraki. In this brief clash, Bakugo proves to be faster than Shigaraki. He manages to hit him, then sees and dodges Shigaraki's counterattack, and finally, when Shigaraki is about to strike again, he jumps and instantly gets behind him. However, Shigaraki suddenly turns around and hits him while he's still mid-air in an instant. So the direction of this final moment is strange. Everything happens at once, leaving the reader confused. Up to that point, Bakugo seemed to have clearly surpassed Shigaraki in speed. But then Shigaraki ends the fight instantly. How is that possible? The explanation of how Shigaraki did it only comes in volume 40. At the end of that volume, Shigaraki says that Bakugo made him stronger, allowing him to adapt to Midoriya's gear shift speed. In short, what this means is that Bakugo was indeed faster than Shigaraki, but Shigaraki managed to adapt to Bakugo's speed, becoming much faster himself. Then he adapted again to someone even faster than him, this time Midoriya in gear shift, repeating the same process and becoming even faster. The point of that line is that if Shigaraki hadn't become faster thanks to Bakugo, he never would have been able to adapt to Midoriya's gear shift speed. The purpose of this narrative choice is to explain how Shigaraki was able to touch Midoriya in gear shift mode, but I found it to be an unsatisfying, rushed and nonsensical explanation. In theory, Shigaraki develops this ability when his body becomes complete, but it's an ability that's barely explained or explored properly. Moreover, it creates major inconsistencies and errors in the final war arc. It's simply used as a narrative shortcut to allow Shigaraki to touch Midoriya, and it doesn't work. That aside, personally I love everything about Bakugo's death scene, the fight itself and the words he says to All Might. And here we get to the heart of the matter. Should Bakugo have stayed dead? Bakugo is saved through Headshot's ultimate ninja heart, extreme puncture thread technique. I actually think the explanation of how Headshot is able to do all that makes sense and is quite beautiful. Timothy Akbar's speech is amazing, and the way it culminates in Headshot's choice is perfect. This section of the story really elevates his character. On the other hand, it's also true that even if Bakugo had stayed dead, Headshot still could have had his moment and a powerful vertical character development. Akbar's speech could have remained and would have carried a much sadder tone to Bakugo's death. He could have still been connected to Headshot, showing his helplessness in being unable to save the boy, and later giving him a key moment against Shigaraki. The fact that Headshot doesn't die by becoming Bakugo's heart is a terrible choice. Headshot should have become his heart and continue to live inside him. He would have carried powerful symbolism and meaning, giving the character a beautiful sacrifice. Now, about Midoriya's arrival. When he finally shows up and sees everyone on the ground, apparently dead, he loses control and rages out. Right after that, Mirio intervenes and tries to reassure him. He tells Midoriya that Tamaki and the others are still alive, and that Headshot is trying to save Bakugo's life at all costs. He says they haven't lost anyone yet, that they haven't given up. This is, of course, a beautiful speech that elevates Mirio's character even further. However, I think that even if Bakugo had truly died, this scene could have stayed almost the same. Mirio could have made a pragmatic choice and decided to lie to Midoriya for the sake of the world. In that scenario, the only way to win would be to calm Midoriya down, and the only way to do that would be to make him believe that everyone was still alive. It would have worked just as well, showing Mirio's strong will. Even in such a desperate situation, he stays composed and acts. Even though he doesn't want to lie to Midoriya, he forces himself to for the sake of the future. So this whole section could have worked perfectly, even with Bakugo's death. Finally, we obviously need to talk about his return in volume 30. Bakugo is one of the main protagonists of that volume, and the key piece in All for One's defeat. He's the one who saves All Might from certain death and stops All for One from reaching Midoriya. If Bakugo had stayed dead in volume 36, the events of volume 30 would obviously have gone very differently. That said, I still think there could have been another equally valid path. Volume 40 is very well written and full of spectacular scenes, but there are issues with the final war arc as a whole that particularly affect this volume. All Might has visions of his teacher and Night Eye in a sort of liminal space. The scenes are beautiful and the dialogue is incredible, but it's a shame that dead characters appear again in a sort of heaven. Also, the fact that Night Eye's prediction of the future is once again broken and changed diminishes his power. In general, it's a shame that everything in the final war always ends well and in such an overly positive way for the heroes. If Bakugo had died and things had gone differently, All Might could have had a brutal and shocking death. A double splash page of All for One splitting All Might in half would have been incredible. Obviously, in that version, someone else would have had to defeat All for One. So, the issue, for me, isn't specifically that Bakugo came back. The problem is that in the entire final war, no hero dies. Everything ends too well, too positively for the heroes. There are no real consequences apart from the villain's deaths. If Bakugo had returned but there had been more deaths and a generally darker, heavier tone, it would have worked perfectly. A scenario where Bakugo lives but the overall atmosphere is more tragic and cynical would have been much more coherent and meaningful. Personally, though, I think I still would have let Bakugo die, because Bakugo is one of My Hero Academia's main characters, and choosing to kill him off permanently would have been an incredibly bold and shocking decision. Very few authors have the courage to kill their protagonists. But again, as I said before, Bakugo's return itself isn't the problem. If the final war had been handled differently, I would have had no issue with it. Bakugo is a wonderful character who goes through tremendous development throughout the story. The only thing I didn't like about him is that I wish he had changed a bit more emotionally by the end of the manga, becoming calmer, more composed. I would have loved to see him grow more polite and kind toward others, while still keeping his explosive nature, his drive to reach the top, and his desire for total victory. It would have been great if, by the end, Bakugo himself had wanted to become a better person, if all his growth and self-reflection had led him to wish to be both stronger and kinder. The perfect moment for that would have been Volume 33, right after Midoriya was brought back. In Volume 11, All Might and Aizawa visit the students' families, and when they meet Bakugo's family, we see how much he resembles his mother, both in looks and personality. In that scene, Bakugo's mother speaks very calmly and politely to the teachers, but we also see that explosive side when she gets angry at Bakugo. I would have loved for Bakugo to become a little bit like his mother, keeping everything that makes him, but becoming less unstable and more capable of positive interactions with others. By the end of the story, Bakugo should have become a more popular hero as a result of his personal growth, and this would have led him to truly be the number one hero in the epilogue. Of course, in truth, Bakugo shouldn't have been in the picture at all, because he should have died. In this version of events, Mirio is ranked as the number one hero. Midoriya, having lost One for All, is no longer a hero, so he can't be number one. There are two reasons why Bakugo isn't the number one hero. The first is that he has a bad temper, which drives people away and makes him unpopular. We have already discussed how this connects to his situation in the previous section. The second is that Midoriya is no longer a hero, which means Bakugo can give his all. In fact, he's the one who funds most of Midoriya's new armor and offers him a place to work with him. Then, when Midoriya returns to active duty as a hero, Bakugo suddenly jumps from 15th place to 5th. It's clear that the idea is that Bakugo performs best when he has a strong rival, but this choice doesn't really work, because he always aims for the top no matter what. Bakugo should have gradually become the number one hero. Horikoshi repeated exactly what he did during the sports festival. In that instance, the offers went mostly to Bakugo and Todoroki, but Todoroki got the most even though Bakugo finished first. That's because Bakugo came off as chaotic and intimidating to the pro heroes and agencies, and in the epilogue, Horikoshi basically followed the same logic again, but it doesn't work. Bakugo should have been the number one hero, followed by Mirio and Todoroki. Again, as I said before, in truth, Bakugo shouldn't have even been a part of that conversation, because he should have died. And that's pretty much everything I wanted to say on this topic. What about you? Do you think Bakugo should have died, or that it works the way it is? Thanks for listening to this video. I think we'll see each other again pretty soon. Bye!